No. Actually, I'd like to weave two stories together. I had planned not to even use the first story. I thought, no, let's just deal with the main story, which is Chicago immigrant stories. But Al Adams' words just hit me Tuesday, and it's been echoing in my mind ever since then. The children are watching. So I decided to weave these two stories together. The children are watching is a story that can be viewed as a consequence to the statements I'm about to make, while Chicago immigrant stories is definitely a response to them. It was the rhetoric that infuriated me the most. The marginalization of entire groups of people based on race, heritage, and even religion. The candidate never held back with using the proverbial they, laced in stereotypical propaganda, hatred disguised as political reform. You've heard it. They don't send their best. They're bringing drugs. They're bringing crime. They're rapists. And some of them, I assume, are good people. Good people, yeah, okay. Just like there are good people on both sides. The children are also listening. It was the perfect July Saturday. 2 parties, 2 houses apart, 2 reasons to celebrate. And I had actually promised my neighbor Dave that I'd come and join his party later that day. But early afternoon, it was my time. We had so many reasons to celebrate. My second daughter had graduated college. It's like, yes, and the good and bad of that is the bad of it is the fact that I can no longer lecture her every single morning on the way to school. That was kind of our thing. You want to ride to school? You let me talk, don't fall asleep. I think she picked up a few things. But the second reason, which is I'm just so happy, some of you may relate to this as parents. This marked the end. It was 7 years, 2 daughters of 5 a.m. swim practices. You don't know what I'm talking about. Okay. You want to know torture. Getting up at 5 o'clock, we live right by Highway 57, which somehow the rule says that at before 7, there is no speed limit. So imagine waking up at 4:30, she has to be there at 5. You jump on the highway and immediately like gunning it. It drives you crazy. So we were celebrating, the reason to celebrate. But after a couple hours, my wife and I decided to, take a little break and kind of replenish the drinks for the adults. As we entered the back door, the front doorbell rings. And a complete stranger greeted us and said, "Did you guys see your front sidewalk?" We said, "No." Well, I didn't want to show you that, but I guess I will. Chicago is historically known as a segregated city. From the 1920s to the 50s, 3/3 of the city's African-American population lived in an area called the Black Belt. That's the only place they could live. A couple of days ago, I took my sons to the area just to show them. The Emmy that you mentioned earlier, I won for a project called, the documentary called Disable to Obama, where I scored music based on early 1900s all the way to the present, but it was a history of African Americans in Chicago. So I wanted my sons to see that while listening to the music in the car. And I explained to one of my sons, this was the dividing line, that if you cross this line, you are risking your life. But as long as you stay on this side of that line, you're okay. That was Chicago during that time. Chicago is also known for its infamous housing projects and for being a classic example for what is known as white flight. But our neighborhood was miraculously kind of immune from the long-ranging effect of white flight. In fact, it really didn't happen. Yes, it had its issues with race, but prided itself on being mature. So you can imagine on that perfect July Saturday afternoon to discover this. I know it's problematic because whoever drew this one could not draw a swastika. But it was the same feeling as watching the fallout from the proposed immigrant ban. Is this really happening in 2017 America? Did this really happen in front of our house? It's sidewalk chalk. It's time to go visit the neighbor. Chicago Jazz Philharmonic is a 60-piece, all-professional, symphonic jazz ensemble, also known as Third Stream. And I know some of you are thinking, that's kind of an oxymoron. How can jazz and classical music live in the same space? How could it be the same? It's too diverse. It's too different. It's 100% jazz, yet 100% classical. But in that paradigm, there are so many possibilities. I'm the composer in residence for the Chicago Jazz Philharmonic, partly because I do it for free. That's a joke. Says our former board chair. I'll talk about that later, why I do it for free. But so as a composer, what this orchestra allows me is a total spectrum of the aesthetics of both music. And it's not simply about performing jazz in one moment and then performing classical the next moment. No, that wouldn't, because then we would regulate the music to the people who specialize in classical, the plays of classical music, and there's people who specialize in jazz. No, there's at least 3,000 decisions along the way. And every composition, it's like a meter that moves. Is it pre-composed? Well, it's moving more toward classical music. Is it improvisationally based? It's moving toward jazz. But then sometimes I call on the classical musicians to improvise, whereas the jazz musicians have to read. So that this spectrum is always turning, the sphere is always spinning with different possibilities. A couple years ago, we went through a lengthy strategic planning process. And at the end, what was striking, it wasn't much about a mission statement, but a vision statement. And the vision statement reflects who we are as a result of what we do. And we started thinking about that. Well, instead of it being a response to what we do, why don't we make it what we do? And we call it our change narrative. So that every time Chicago Jazz Philharmonic hits the stage, or is in the classroom, or is leading a educational business workshop, change happens. First of all, change in the conversation, because again, we have to talk about that. How did that work? How do we have classical and jazz together? How would we have different mindsets working and solving problems and coming up with something that was totally exceeding of our expectations? There's also a change in the creative practice, so that I can break all the rules. I love breaking rules. I love breaking rules. It kind of started, well, even before college, but I almost got expelled. I was a freshman at DePaul University, and I think it was the first recital. So school had just started, and I played the Haydn trumpet concerto. So it's very classical, and the intent is to play it exactly as Joseph Haydn wrote it, which it may. Since I'm more jazz today, it may be my interpretation of Haydn. But anyway, so piano player starts the introduction. Time for the trumpet. See, did I tell you? So we play on and on, we play on and on. At the end of the first movement, there's a section that says cadenza. Didn't quite know what that meant, but I have a dictionary. So in the dictionary, it says a cadenza is the time where the performer can show his skills. How cool is that? So we get to that section, and the pianist was also a jazz. So we decided, okay, here's where we're going to start the cadenza. And everyone starts laughing. I'm like, what is the problem? This is my cadenza. Near the end of the cadenza, the dean is standing at the door. And he didn't give me a time to take a bow. Come here. At the dean's office, he said, don't you ever do that again. So I want to send a message to the former dean of DePaul. I'm still doing it. So changing dialogue, changing the creative practice, changing lives. Now that's a risky one, because how do we affect lives? How do we change lives? It's in our programming. It's in the fact that it's bringing people together. It's in the June concert of this summer, right down the street, Millennium Park. We performed Chicago Immigrant Stories. In July, we celebrated Nelson Mandela's 100th birthday with Dee Alexander, and a very inspiring moment when, in the second movement, we performed the South African national anthem. And we have a great relationship with the South African consulate in Chicago, and immediately South Africans stood and Americans stood, and instead of placing their hand on their heart, they raised the fist in the air. So 10,000 people in unity for Nelson Mandela in celebration of his birthday. But then we had a fun concert just a few weeks ago, opening the Chicago Jazz Festival with my good friend Kurt Elling, singing "Bringing the House Down." But when you see it, it's a 60-piece orchestra. It's classical. It's jazz. So when we change lives, their direct effect is we change communities, and that's what we're about. Picture at the top our first home, and we kind of still consider it home. It's the Auditorium Theater. But there's a problem. If we produce change in what we do, and it costs $75 to see us, are we really producing change? Or is change something that's afforded to people who can afford the admission, who can pay admission for it? You can't buy change. So this summer, I marched into the commissioner's office of Arts and Planning, and he runs Millennium Park, and I said, I want 3 days at Millennium Park. He said, okay, you got to pay for it. Okay. So I went to our executive director, Bertie Sodi, and my business manager, Mark Ingram. They said, you did what? Well, I kind of committed us to these 3 concerts for next summer. And the reason is that if we're going to produce change, it must be free, must be acceptable for everyone. But a miracle happened that with this mission, other people also believed in that mission. So we were able to do actually 4 concerts in a year span at Millennium Park with 7,000 to 10,000 people in each audience. In the process, we formed a children's choir that was amazing. And you guys got to experience some of our students Monday night. I could do a whole speech on that. The effect of change in lives, that's what really matters. So, if I could, because I pay no attention to budgets, I would bring the entire orchestra right here for you to experience it, but we can't do that. So I'm going to give you a 5-minute mini concert to just experience some of the aspects of the blending of classical and jazz. This first excerpt is from a performance a few years ago at Symphony Center. We were honoring composer Gunther Schuller, who coined the phrase third stream. During the day, Gunther was a French hornist with the New York Met. At night, he hung out with Dizzy Gillespie and Miles Davis and Duke Ellington. And he coined a phrase, third stream, that says that there's a meeting place between jazz and classical. But the problem with that is he could not find the classical musicians to interpret jazz because it's just simply not in the pedagogy. Matter of fact, it's discouraged from the pedagogy. And so when we contacted him and said we're honoring him and playing his music, he was in his 80s and he came by himself to Chicago just to see who these crazy people are. And on the phone he said, don't even try, it's not going to happen. I failed at it. So he came to the concert and this is what happened. Oh, thank you. You can imagine how nervous I was having Gunther Schuller there. When we first started in rehearsal, I was, I wanted to impress him, because he didn't even know me. So I'm conducting and I'm cueing all the musicians. He looks at me and says, "Why are you working so hard? They're professionals. You don't have to cue everything." And so I came up with a phrase I tell the orchestra. I said, "I will wave my arms until the music stops. Just do your job." That's a joke too. Anyway, I'm not a good joke teller, but you notice various things within the aesthetics of the classical symphony that is basically destroyed in the process. Toward the end, I did a lot of conducting, but there was a place where my arms stopped and I simply stood. That's because I no longer became the conductor. I learned that classical musicians listen with their eyes. They listen for the beat by knowing exactly where I place it. It's called the ictus. It's an age-long tradition that this is where it is and this is how we stay together. And if I stop, the chances are there will be catastrophe because where is the beat? They see the beat. But when the jazz transitions, I'm not necessary. Now you listen with your ears or you see with your ears. Because the symphony looks like a traditional symphony except for the fact that the jazz quintet is in the middle. And that's the reason the heart is right here, because it has to be centrally located so that it can affect the entire ensemble. And I don't know if some of you noticed that the tempo from the time the piece started to the end was gradually accelerated, which makes it even more difficult for everyone to swing while doing that. I could tell you 1,000 more things. Another project we're taking to the studio, Chicago Jazz Philharmonic. We were commissioned by the Boeing Company to write a 3-movement work in honor of our troops. This was in conjunction with Chicago Bears and Chicago Blackhawks. So for my research, I studied Sebastian Junger's book, War, and the movie Restrepo. And basically, this 3rd movement excerpt is called "The Face of the Enemy is Always Changing." And in this movie, there was this time when a platoon was about to be overtaken. But there was basically, I want to say about 15, 17 minutes of silence, except for the sound of twigs breaking. And all we see are young kids with their hands on the trigger where something's about to happen. So I wanted to take that feeling and alongside of this beautiful landscape of Afghanistan and create this music. And it was hard to pick those two, but there's hundreds more. You can find them on our website. But on to the Chicago immigrant stories, because that's really what I'm here to talk about. The process itself was a process of taking risks. as I said earlier in the clip, I wanted to do something about this proclamation of an immigrant ban. So the only tool I felt I had was Facebook. So I basically told stories of my friends. And literally in 30 minutes, I had over 200 responses. And they weren't just, congratulations, or, the hearts or the dancing bears or whatever. They were stories, people sharing their stories. And none was more profound than pianist harmonica virtuoso Howard Levy. So I called Howard and I said, Howard, what do we do about this? What do we do as artists? And so we just started to brainstorm, saying, well, what would a concert, how would that work? So we said, yeah, we can do a concert where we invite friends from other communities, but there's something missing. Because the takeaway from the audience would be, well, that's great. I mean, look at the diversity. And I'm trying not to be on the soapbox. Most orchestras who have a diversity problem, they will fix it by hiring an African American. And they'll say, whew, done, we're diverse now. But my question is, well, did that affect the music? Are you still playing the same music that's 400 years old because now you have an African American in the orchestra? How does that change? Is it arranging a box of crayons? Does that fix it? No. So we decided to start with our help of our executive director. Bertie was going crazy. Sorry, Bertie, for all the angst that we put you through. But we started in October, first with identification, with identifying communities. And the risk was to go into this pretending like we knew nothing, to be able to absorb everything from our new friends. Now, I'd love to say that I had a great method of finding people other than Google. So I Googled Chinese American musicians in Chicago. And Kerry Lang was of his website, and I said, oh, he looks cool. Wow, he plays all these instruments. Perfect. So we arranged, with each of the community, we arranged meetings to say, well, let's talk. And the first thing Kerry said when he walked in, I don't improvise, I don't play jazz. But as we talked later, he started playing, and I asked him, I said, well, did you write that out? He said, no, I'm just playing it. You improvise. You're a jazz musician. Good. You're good. So each leader of each community was charged with finding one or two other musicians from that they work with, who were part of their team, that we would arrange a series of, first of all, conversations. We logged at least 60 hours of conversation with which each group, and as you saw in the video, it's just talking. Like, how does it feel? When did you come to Chicago? What were your challenges? How are you as a musician? Are you able to sustain yourself as a musician? All these questions. And everyone was so open to have that conversation, to talk about themselves. And then, mind you, no music is written at all, not yet. And then we went to the different communities and created what we call our innovation lab, which we simply go on stage with no plan other than to play the music. What music? We don't know. It's taking that conversation to the next level in front of an audience, which was absolutely magical. But there's a method to my madness. So identification, conversation, exploration, and then comes the application, which now I'm getting scared because it's already late March. The concert is scheduled for June, right, Bertie? Yeah. June, I have not composed a single note. I learned, actually it was in Cuba, I learned how to be a real composer, to take the pressure off of oneself. Part of a grant that we received through the MacArthur Foundation was to go to another country and do an exchange where we go to the country and then bring those musicians back to Chicago. And part of the deal was I was to compose a piece honoring this collaboration. But our drummer, Ernie Adams, who is a specialist in world music, he said, do not do it. Do not attempt to write Cuban music, because you're not going to get it. Just like I can't speak Spanish. It's like Tiffany telling me, showing me a dance step, and then I do it. I can probably go like this, and but not the way she's going to do it, because it's not me. So the same thing with the clave. You know how many hours I practiced that to get that right? But here's what I did. On our previous trip to Cuba, I recorded every minute of sitting at the feet of a master percussionist, Orlando Lopez Alfonso. And he was working for a dance ensemble, and literally 30 hours of Orlando playing, and Raul, they were playing, and just the most amazing African-based Cuban music. So I said, well, if I don't know how to write Cuban music, I have to go to the master. So I found literally 4 measures that were golden in this recording. So I sampled the 4 measures, extracted it, and simply took it and transferred it to the orchestra. So when we're at the university working with the kids, we brought Orlando as our special guest. I whispered to Orlando, and I played the original recording. You remember this? Oh, yeah. I said, when I point to you, start playing that. So as I started conducting. And so the music was magical, but everyone thought, they're like, an American who can write our music. No, I simply depended on the master to show me what are the parameters in that. But I did accept the bow, thank you so much. It was But anyway, I learned that process of recording every moment. So in this process, we recorded every single moment, and I was left with the task of finding those 4 bars, those magical moments that were so spontaneous that would later become part of the composition. That's what we did. There was a little bit of a problem. Caliamos, he was genius. We learned that our Chinese-American musician, Minghua Carey and Jun Lee, do not read Western notation. Should we cancel the concert? Oh, yeah, what are we going to do? But what I discovered in these recordings was the songs that Carey talked about, the folk songs, the Chinese classical songs that talk about life. And I noticed that every time the 3 of them played their favorite traditional songs, they played it exactly the same way. Bingo. My job now is to compose a symphony around what they already can do. So the only thing we had to do in rehearsal was, okay, I wrote this as a concerto form, so just look at me and I'll tell you when to start playing and when to stop playing. So it worked. But again, I didn't have to dig deep or even pretend that I know what I'm doing, but simply to rely on the genius of my friends. And so identification, conversation, many hours of conversation, exploration, the application, and then comes the creation of the work, which, as the video said, we performed at Millennium Park, Chicago, and we also included dance as part of the concert. Another quick story. Years ago, I was an associate professor of jazz at University of Illinois at Chicago, and I made it a practice to never throw away the great papers that students would write. Yeah, it was a jazz history class. I resigned and gave that part of my life up, but when I started in the program, we had one class of 40 students. By the time I resigned, we had 4 sections of 100 students each. And they probably just took the class, they thought it was going to be easy. I had a lot of athletes in the class, and they didn't know that I'll be tough on them as well as everyone else. I failed the star soccer player. I was so proud of myself. Yeah, but he cheated. He didn't even write the paper, but his paper looked, two players, his paper looked strangely like someone else in the soccer team's player, and it was written by somebody else, except that all the adjectives were changed. But I love reading papers. So I get this paper from Vidya, who parallels Indian dance with jazz improvisation.
5 minutes out of the exercise.
8 years later, I never forgot that.
But I just
Called her first. I said, are you still dancing with Nadia? Yes, I am. Come be a part of our celebration. My mentor years ago told me as a composer, never throw away anything you've written. It will show up somewhere in your music. So, the concert was a success. I was going to bring examples of the concert, but I'm really picky about sound and all that. I said, you get the gist of the story. But lastly, hero. The hero to the first story is actually my neighbor Dave. I went to his house, and we were greeted with hugs. He had about 50 people at his house, 50 people at my house. And we talked, we have these really big backyards, so we were looking at what he did with his yard, and we were talking, and there was a point when we were finally alone. I said, Dave, we have a problem. I said, someone drew swastikas on my sidewalk, and he kind of looks like no one here would do it. And I said, with that chalk. I kind of messed up Dave's day, because the rest of the day, he interrogated all of his friends and relatives to find out who did this, because he just could not believe that someone would do that. 11 o'clock that evening, he comes to the back of our house and says, Orbert, and Lisa, my wife, come here, come up front. So we go up front, and there's two kids, two boys, basically a couple years older than my boys, and they had a watering can and a broom, and they were pale, really afraid. But somebody snitched on them. And Dave said, so Dave gave him a speech. I gave him a longer speech on American history and warned them that the path that they've chosen, even though they may be ignorant, even though they may be following this propaganda and not really know what it means, it's dangerous. But Dave's a hero, because Dave then said, and I'll do this without tears, Dave said, look, guys, I am the one who chose them to be my neighbor. He was the one who showed us the house. It was an open house with a lot of people, and he's best friends with the homeowner. And they had a conversation. I want that family in this house. I want them as my neighbor. He's a hero. So the question is, what do I do about that? I did file a police report. I felt that was the right thing to do. And my sister-in-law, my brother-in-law, who are all attorneys, said, oh, yeah, you can get them. Just get them. I said, no. I forgave him. Totally forgave him. And you know why? I forgave him because there are other boys that I know, that I've seen, who are in the high school jail, Cook County Jail for high school, who made a stupid mistake. They were the ones who were carrying the drugs to the next location, but they got caught, so their life will forever be scarred because they did something out of ignorance and stupidity. So I had to forgive these guys so they would not wear this forever, so they would learn from it. And we also invited them to the concert, because that's the bigger picture. Sometimes we make those mistakes, but it's a lifelong learning experience. I have an assignment for you real quick before we do our last thing, and we may have questions. Okay, I can't dance, I can't jump. Look at that, whoa, that's like pretty serious. Okay. In 2015, we brought 37 of those Cuban students to Chicago to perform with us at the Auditorium Theater. This is the very last note of the concert. I need a caption. So, as we continue, write a caption and just stick it on the board here. I want to see what you think. We have, I think, what is our Mark Ingram, my best friend, business partner. We came up with, like, what is it? Reach for it. And don't stop till the music stops. I don't know, that's Michael Jackson. No, don't stop to get enough. Anyway, so if you do that, I'd appreciate that. So lastly, what I love about the Fred Forum, and I really thank you for allowing me to be a part of it, not just to present, but to absorb every single minute. And I am so thankful for the conversations we've had. I never left any conversation not feeling inspired. But David Newhouse, we met in Denver, and he wrote a poem. I said, we have to perform that poem. So if David would come to the stage, we're going to do an improvisational interpretation. So we're starting a new program called, let's call it Softer Than a Diffused Firecracker. That's also a joke, people. Louder than a bomb, softer than a...
I thought we'd call this fourth stream. Poetry and music. So when I came to Denver 3 years ago, I was so blown away. I met this amazing man, and I realized that his beautiful music came from his amazing spirit. And so I was so impressed, and my daughter, who's also a Freddie, but couldn't make it this year, is an internationally published poet. And I said, I would really like to write a poem about what I heard. And she said, you can do this. So I did. I wrote this October 2nd, 2015. It's called Third Stream. And I actually sent it to him. In fact, his manager said she remembers the poem, so that made me feel pretty good. I thought it can't be too bad. And I actually showed this to some of the people yesterday. I said, is this any good? They said, oh, yeah, it's good.
Ready?
So I'm going to read it.
My business for
He's gonna play it.
If
Okay, I'll start.
If you have a chance, can you take a photograph for the website, please? Thank you. If it, I mean, it's not a picture.
The notes float lightly with a purpose of entering and changing my soul. My feet follow the rhythm of the beat unconsciously, not under my control. The spiritual soul of jazz is frameless, complex, never repeating or ever the same. Playful, joyful, uplifting, or sad and lonely as the sound of a distant midnight train. A collision of instruments, strings, percussion, piano, and brass acting as one. In conflict, in harmony, cajoling and yet supporting. Until the riff is finally done. 8 hearts beating in synchronous rhythm, but ultimately finding the way. To free the music found in each heart, for locked hidden, it can no longer stay. The notes skip beats, ascend as soaring crystals of beauty lacking flaws. The music is truth, expressed in the moment, pure and flowing without pause. The power of music is to enrapture all with open spirits into the circle of life, a potion for the heart to heal the wounds and scars left by battle and strife. It ends when the final notes fade away after being blown on that golden horn, a gift to our souls forever, the fire in our spirits reborn.
Thank you, Dave. Thank you. Thank you.